Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Jayadvaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Binda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Binda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare
Jai Om Vishnupad Purnamans Paripraj Kacharya Stotra Satasri Srimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Adanta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Nam Acharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sakaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sham Kund Radha Kunigiri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadip Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol. One more moment of setup, and I'm right with you. Okay, now we're good. Maybe. Welcome. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashtachate Satarane. Vanshako Pitarubhyascha Kripa Sindho Pyevacha Patita Nam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So again, welcome. And I wonder what questions we have stocked up. Or bubbling up.
Maharaj?
Ma?
Hare Krishna. Before the questions start, I just wanted to say I was in contact with Suman Prabhu today, and we are working together. I'm helping him with getting together something for the 10 offenses. So hopefully in a week or so, that's something to look forward to, hopefully. Just letting you know.
Good.
He's starting school this week, I think, so he's been a little busy.
Aha. Okay. Well, I'll start off by telling you something I've been. Whoops.
Hold it. I'm just pressing. Yeah, you have. Camera's broken. Hi, Krishna. Sorry, did you want to speak? Sorry to interrupt. My camera's not working right now. The only way it works is by restarting my computer. Did I hear you? Yeah, you can hear me. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. We're hearing you fine.
All right, well, I can say something, even though my camera's not working. You know, I'm always curious about your Srila Prabhupada's editor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, what was that like? And like, of course, in the very early days, you didn't have so much knowledge. So like you wouldn't really, I assume, notice like if there were some technical kind of discrepancies or, you know what I mean, little mistakes. Like, were you only doing like grammar and spelling, or did you also edit content? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Fair question. Well, let me tell you how I when I joined
turn on my camera
at 26 Second Avenue.
You need to have to turn off the computer.
If you mute yourself, yeah, there we go. Kamalini, good. When I joined at 26 Second Avenue, there were various services to do. And what I gravitated toward was assisting with typing at the Back to Godhead office. At that time, the editor of BTG was a devotee named Rai Rama, who Prabhupada mentioned at one point as being one of the pillars of our society. He later left, but at that time he was there. And he had an office on 14. He was staying, and that was the office also. And I began typing. That was my service. I don't know how much I learned in school, but one thing I learned to do was type, because among other things, because my handwriting was so scrawly that I knew that I'd need to type if I was going to go to school and so on. And so anyway, to make a long story short, I knew how to type. So I wound up as typist for Rai Rama. So I was typing BTG articles and that sort of thing. And also typing, he had the whole manuscript of Bhagavad Gita as it is there at the time. And so I was typing that. I retyped the whole manuscript of Bhagavad Gita as it is. And what else did I? Nectar of Devotion, when that came in, I typed that. So typist, I was doing a lot of typing, which I was happy with because, among other things, it put me right in the middle of the philosophy, which I liked. While typing it, I'm reading it. So by reading it, I'm getting in on everything that's being the Prabhupada's his books. So that's going on. Then later, I moved, the press was organized, ISKCON Press in Boston. And I continued there, typing. And there, Satsvarup Maharaj had been the typist for Srimad Bhagavatam. Prabhupada would send him cassettes, these dictaphone cassettes. Dictaphone is a trade name. It was actually Grundig recorder, Grundig. So Prabhupada would send him the tapes, and he would transcribe them and also edit them. The system was he would do a first editing, and then later Hayagriva Prabhu would do a second editing. So I'm typing. At some point, I was also typing Krishna book. I think that was a little later, but third canto, beginning of third canto. And while typing, I was seeing errors, simple errors. So should I fix this? Yes, fix that. Whether it was a spelling error or something about capitalization or consistency. So I was fixing that. I was seeing grammatical errors also. So should I fix this? Yes, fix that. So gradually I began editing in full, full out, full strength. It started in that way. So then I gradually became an editor, and I think I moved ahead of Satsvarup Maharaj in that he was doing other things. So I began doing more typing and more editing. He was the temple president. He gradually became a GBC man, and I was doing more. From the beginning, or pretty much the beginning, it was not only spelling, but it had to be grammar, because it was obvious that there were grammatical errors. Krishna would tell the gopis, some demon would come to Vrindavan and Krishna would say, don't be afraid of. So obvious is not necessary. So you lop it off. Simple thing. But there were so many other things that were obviously errors. It would be the wrong word, or it would be a grammatical construction. Like we all know that Prabhupada, in English, for questions, you invert the word order. So I should be afraid becomes why should I be afraid? But Prabhupada would always say typically why I should be afraid. That is, he wouldn't follow the convention of inverting the word order. And that's very typical in Indian English. Typically, you leave it alone. Why I should do like that? instead of why should I, why I should. So we would invert the word order for him, or so many other things, making sure that a singular subject is followed by a singular verb, that he is used for men and she is used for women, and so on. So from the very beginning, really, I was involved in editing not only the spelling and punctuation, but the grammar also, and various aspects of the wording. And sometimes probably would say the same things twice. Sometimes the end of the tape, a tape would end and he'd say something, and a new tape would begin, he'd say the same thing. So you have to cure the redundancy. So from the very beginning, I was involved like that. And I didn't know very much. I'd never gone to college. I was not a stellar in English by any means. I didn't really know anything other than you would know by growing up in America and reading books. But I gradually, since I was in the service of editing, I began reading all sorts of books about writing and editing. There was a book by Sheridan Baker, The Complete Stylist, a college text that I learned a lot from. And I picked up various other books, of course, the famous Strunk and White, The Elements of Style, and pretty much all sorts of books on editing, on guides on word usage. There are books by Theodore Bernstein, the former editor at the New York Times, and all sorts of books. And I would read them and read them and read them and read them, and learn something about standards for English editing. And that's how I got going. To the point where nowadays, pretty much any book I pick up, I'll see errors in it. I'll pick up a book by Oxford University Press and see extensive errors sometimes. It's amazing, actually. The big universities are in the business of publishing lots and lots of books, and really not carefully editing them at all. So you see spelling errors, you see punctuation errors, you see grammatical errors, you see all sorts of errors that are just in a carefully edited book wouldn't be there. But,
Yeah. Especially if it was printed in India, yes?
Excuse me?
Especially if the book is coming from India, written in India, there's usually a lot of errors. Oh, sorry about that echo. Don't you
Well,
find?
I'm talking.
I
Go
know
ahead.
you're talking about very, like books from even universities and all, but especially books from India. Often I wonder, don't they have a proofreader or an editor or something?
Yeah, of course, especially sort of our Loy Bashar sort of books, self-published
Right.
books are very often not carefully edited. And from one point of view, we don't care. There are books where we want to know what the book says, and grammar may be this way or that way, but we care about the message, the content, and so we're less concerned about the niceties of English. We go for it. Srinvanti Gayanti Grananti Sadhava. It may be irregularly composed, but one who's appreciative of the subject matter will hear it and speak about it and accept it. Grananti, he'll accept it. So so yes, that's there. We don't, even Srimad Bhagavatam, we have the first 3 volumes that Prabhupada published in India. And it's interesting, our Jagadish Prabhu one time pointed out in a lecture. He was speaking about that verse, Srimad Bhagavatam, that even if a work is irregularly composed, it will be accepted by, heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. And he said this is practically a prediction of Srila Prabhupada's books. Because when you read the first canto, it's completely irregularly composed. There are grammatical errors, there are spelling errors, there's punctuation errors. Sometimes the type is upside down, literally upside down. So it's very much irregularly composed. But these books were heard, sung, and accepted by those who were honest. So, and it's meant for creating a revolution, Viplava, in the misdirected civilization of the world. So, and Prabhupada's message was so urgent that he couldn't wait to make sure that it was carefully edited and carefully spelled, and the spelling was right, the grammar was right. He had a message to get out there, and he followed the principle which he cited from Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, that when there's an emergency, say a fire in the house or something like that, the inhabitants make themselves understood by the neighbors, even though they may not speak the same language. Somehow or other, you wave, you point, you do something to get across to people that there's a fire, there's a fire. And it's not the grammar or the poetry that you're looking for. It's somehow or other to get the word out. So Prabhupada followed that principle. He couldn't wait to make everything carefully refined. He urgently had a message that he wanted to give to the world. And so he did his best and published. Did everything himself, the typing, the editing, getting it typeset, getting it printed, getting it distributed, everything, one-man show. And then when he came to the West, gradually an English professor joined him, Hayagriva Prabhu, and other devotees came to help him. And so he was able to establish a proper standard for publishing his books. But even then, he put speed over niceties. If take Chaitanya Charitamrita, for example, a college professor or a scholar, a Western academic, would carefully go over the book and carefully go over it and send it around to all his colleagues and have it carefully vetted and go over it and examine this question and examine that question and try to get everything exactly. And he might spend, 10 years or more on a work like Chaitanya Charitamrita. Huge undertaking. And Prabhupada did it in a year or something? The whole Bhagavad Gita he did in less than a year, if I have my numbers right, roughly that amount of time. And he had in mind a production line. He wrote us about it. One day, one person edits a tape. The next day, one day it's typed. One day for typing. One day for editing. One day for second editing. One day for retyping. One day for typesetting. One day for layout. And in a week, it's done. That was like the sort of schedule that Prabhupada had in mind. Like a carefully thought out or a carefully scheduled work. Well, it doesn't work that way. An editor, as editors, we found ourselves unable to just edit a tape in a day. The amount of work that's required, the amount of concentration, what goes into the work winds up taking quite a bit more than a day sometimes. Even the typing may not be done in a day. So we were quite slower than Srila Prabhupada had in mind. And still we felt that we were rushing. Still we felt that we were rushing. But Prabhupada, it was almost Prabhupada's, he wanted accuracy, of course, but he really wanted speed. When I was the production manager for Bhagavad Gita as it is, he didn't write me anything about making sure that the content was this or that. He wrote me about speed. Where is it? Where is it? The world is waiting. And if we can't give the world this book, it is our fault. When is it coming? You told me this, and still it is delayed. He was really pushing to get it out. Prabhupada really wanted it out. And when you think about it, he had 10 years for his whole campaign, from the time that he came to the West to the time that he left this world. It was 10 years. And in 10 years, he had to give everything. So he gave the Krishna book, he gave the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam early on, not knowing whether he would live to see the 10th canto itself come out. He gave Bhagavad Gita, the fundamental text. He gives Nectar of Devotion, the science of devotional service. He gives Chaitanya Charitamrita, the major work for the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And of course, he gives Srimad Bhagavatam. So, and a little of this and that in between. Ishopanishad, Nectar of Instruction. Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, of course, was practically the first book. So many important texts Srila Prabhupada gives, all within that short space, and really quite something. So maybe that answers a little more than your question.
Yeah, I'm sure probably others have, are you all hearing an echo? I'm hearing it.
No, you're fine.
All right. Well, as far as also content, like in Canto 1, Chapter 13, text number 4, well, it's actually 3 and 4, in reference to when Vidura returned to the palace and all the inhabitants, they went to greet him and to hear from him. And it gives a short biography of many of the people who were present. So as far as it speaks about Prita or Kunti Devi, but then one thing it says is how Kunti, she was reluctant, but her husband encouraged her that she can call for the demigods to beget sons. And then it said the other 2 sons, namely Nakula and Sahadev, were begotten by Pandu himself in the womb of Madri. So we understand from Mahabharat that that wasn't so, that she had called the Ashwini Kumaras. So something like that, would you, back then, like I said, you probably didn't know a whole lot, but if you saw something like that, would you bring that to Srila Prabhupada's attention? And you know what I mean?
Yeah. Practically, hardly ever did we do that. Did we bring things to Prabhupada's attention? Very rarely. There were such things, of course. There were questions that should it be this, should it be that? Most of the time we tried to figure these things out on our own, especially when there were questions that you couldn't figure out just from the English. We would consult the Sanskrit editors, Pradumna at first, and then he gradually had assistance because they could go into the text and say, it was this, it was that. And writing to Srila Prabhupada was difficult. Prabhupada was traveling all over the world, and to write to him was difficult. To send a letter to India would take like a week, at least. To get a letter back from India would take another week. And that's assuming that you hit the right target, that if you wrote to Bombay, Prabhupada would actually be in Bombay. So we tended not to write to Prabhupada just because of the time involved. And you know, we're trying to go fast, and meanwhile you write a question and it holds things up. Also, the getting across what the issue was in writing. If you wrote to Prabhupada and then you got an answer back that reflected that you hadn't communicated the question clearly enough, then you'd be stuck. You know, you'd have waited 2 weeks to get an answer that didn't quite answer your question. You couldn't go back and forth the way you might with an author who was, you know, in the same place, in the same town at least, or even the same country. So we tended not to write to Srila Prabhupada. Every now and then we did. And the artists were more free about writing to Prabhupada. It might have been our attitude also. We tended not to want to pester Prabhupada. The artists did send a lot of questions to Prabhupada. Should this person have a beard? Should this person, how should this person look? But the English editors, we tended to do that less. One time I did send a letter to Prabhupada, or actually lots of times what I would do would be piggyback something. Someone would be writing a letter to Prabhupada and I would piggyback a question. You know, Jadharani would write or Satsuru Maharaj would write, and I would have a question to add there. But anyway, one time I wrote a letter to Prabhupada, I think it was me. And there was in Krishna book, there was something that was unclear. It was in the last chapter of Krishna book. There was a question, there was a passage that was unclear. And Prabhupada gave a one-word answer, Yaduvara Parishad. Yaduvara Parishad. The Prabhupada had been, the verse he was summarizing was Jayati Nivaso, Devi Janmavado, Yaduvari Parishad, Swadorabhira Shyamna Dharma. So Prabhupada wrote a one-word answer, Yaduvari Parishad. The purport of that was, here's the text that I'm glossing, that I'm commenting on, fix it accordingly. Especially you've got your Sanskrit. So here's what I'm trying to convey, the purport of Yaduvara Parishad. So you put it into good English. That was the answer that he gave. He didn't say all that, he just wrote Yaduvara Parishad. And then he wrote also in that same letter, many thanks for your, something like hard work, Krishna will bless you. Continue your prescribed duty and train others. That instruction Prabhupada gave. Continue your prescribed duty and train others. I think he gave that instruction to many devotees, continue your prescribed duty and train others. But yeah, so we tended not to write to Srila Prabhupada. We would just fix things, or sometimes not. That area you're speaking about, the Ashwini Kumar question, Ashwini Kumar as against Pandu himself, has been known about for decades. But Prabhupada says it in more places than one. Begotten by Pandu himself. And we've just left it. Because although we know that it's supposed to be the Ashwini Kumars, according to Mahabharata, we just respected that that's what Prabhupada said. And so we left it. It wasn't a transcription error. It wasn't something like that. Prabhupada had said it. And so we left it. There's a similar section about Bhishmadev being present at the Rajasuya Yagya, which of course took place, if I have it right, I think this was the issue, took place after the Battle of Kurukshetra, when of course Bhishmadev had already expired. But the Prabhupada said it, and we've just left it. It's a known discrepancy, or you can say a known error, but we've left it. That's called Arsha Prayog. That, well, that's what the Rishi said. Sometimes you'll see something in Srimad Bhagavatam, the meter is not quite right, or the grammar is questionable, or there's some issue there. And the commentators will just write, they'll just note it and they'll say Arsha, which means, well, that's what the Rishi said. That's what the Rishi said. And yeah, we see that it's technically an error, but we just leave it because, well, that's what the Rishi said. So lots of times, or not, yeah, sometimes we've just left things because it's clear that it wasn't a typist error or anything of that nature. It's what Srila Prabhupada said, so we've left it. Especially, yeah, sometimes we've done that. And other times we just fixed it. Yaduvada Parishat, that's what Prabhupada is trying to say, and we fix it. Probably more often than not, particularly when it's not something, yeah, we just fixed it during Prabhupada's time. So many different things. I mean, and that was the work of the editor. The editor is there to catch errors in grammar, errors in spelling, but also things that are redundant and things that are just obvious errors. Sometimes the person will type after the battle, and it's clear that he doesn't mean the, he just means the once. So you fix it, you knock it out. Or sometimes, well, there'd be so many things. And lots of times, especially the later you go in the books, the more you see Pradumna, just fixing things that wouldn't have been clear, things that were technically, Prabhupada had said A, but it should have been B. And Pradumna would just fix them. He was traveling with Prabhupada. He was entrusted with the work, and he would just fix them, and we'd get a manuscript with Pradumna's fixes included. And Prabhupada entrusted him with that work. So it was really, it's easy to think that Prabhupada just sort of wrote, Krishna dictated and Prabhupada wrote, and you just fix the spelling and the grammar and you're done. It was just as easy as that. Well, it never was. It never was. There were always questions of so many issues that came within the duty of an editor to refine, to fix, to revise. At the same time, keeping in mind that it's not the editor's book, it's the author's book. So you're not at liberty to just change willy-nilly. You're trying to keep the author's voice, the author's message. You're trying to be faithful and true to the author at the same time that you're making these kinds of necessary revisions. So all that goes into editing. Is that okay, Kamalini?
I don't want to take from other people that want to ask. Remember,
You take whatever comes. You've got the floor.
All right. When I saw the beginning of the debate. Do you hear echo?
No, you're okay.
In the beginning of the debate, like the Rudy Prabhu, he was like, I'm embarrassed because some of the scholars who he, rubbing shoulders with, they point out to him, this is a mistake here and there. and I feel embarrassed. But then later, then somehow he switched to the other side on the against the editing camp. So I just found that kind of interesting. Like you said, it's not changing, although there is a huge contingent who have criticized you for changing, right? Saying that you did change Prabhupada's words and all of that. But here we're hearing that there's so much that you saw obviously was not what you knew from other scriptures like the Mahabharata, but or from other places in the Prabhupada's books, but you still left it because he said it. So I know you must be very tired of this debate, I'm sure, but it's kind of because I sell books
Well, go
and
ahead.
people ask me, well, do you have the unedited? I only want the unedited versions and like that.
Yeah. Well, of course, as you know, there's no unedited books except for the first canto published in India. All
Mm.
the others were edited extensively. Of course, what the people you're talking to mean is not edited again after Prabhupada's departure. And fair enough, one can
Right.
take that position. Um, I'm not really involved in this anymore. The last time that I edited, actually, I only revised, I think, 2 works after Srila Prabhupada's departure. One was Bhagavad Gita as It Is, published in 1983, and the other was Nectar of Devotion, published, well, I could look it up, but sometime probably not too distant from then, although I don't remember in which direction, when first or Bhagavad Gita first. Those were really the 2 books that I was involved in revising. So that was like Bhagavad Gita was what, about 40 years ago, 45 years ago that I revised Bhagavad Gita. And I haven't been really involved in revising any other books. I've commented on the revisions of others, and I think it should be this, I should think it should be that. So I've been involved in that way, but I haven't undertaken the revision of any other book. And now I'm not involved at all for the last year or more. I haven't been involved with BBT editorial affairs. So really where the things go now is up to the trustees. What books they want to publish, edited to what extent, is entirely up to them. If they want to do a 3rd or a 4th edition of Bhagavad Gita as it is, that's fine. If they want to distribute this version or that version, that's fine. If whatever they want to do it's not my responsibility, it's really theirs. So in that sense, it's a debate that doesn't affect me. I'm not involved. I don't have a dog in the race. Yes, Tulsi Priya.
Hi, Krishna Maharaj. Thank you very much. I was just thinking, this is kind of related to my comment about related to the urgency, but hearing what you're saying, I was thinking some devotee with a business background who could write a very nice hybrid bridge book talking about how the Krishna consciousness movement went from nothing to a worldwide organization in a very short period of time. And talking about the process of the editing and everything, I'm just thinking how Prabhupada had so much faith in Krishna that he delegated the duties to you and to others who were immature in age, immature in devotional service, at least in this life, and that you all had faith in his instruction, and you weren't like all consumed with self-doubt and mentalness and everything. You just did what you did and trusted that Krishna would make things right. And so I just feel like it's remarkable. The whole thing was running on faith and Prabhupada faith in Krishna. And if he hadn't done that, what would have happened? You know, it was not possible for him to do every little thing on his
Yeah.
own.
Of course, we had our share of gentleness. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you
Yeah.
off.
Oh, it's just really remarkable because still there's work going on today, you know, to make things, you know, proper for future generations. And, you know, the whole BBT is this massive organization within an organization. And I guess I'm just wondering, you know, it seems like there's a principle there that anybody could use, even outside of Krishna consciousness, you know, to get things done, but especially within Krishna consciousness for future devotees who have projects and missions within the movement to get things going. And I was thinking that's also related to Ravindra Prabhu, who speaks about the 4 regulative principles being principles of cognition. And so maybe not everybody was, you know, so adherent when Prabhupada was present, but they were running on his potency and his faith. But it seems that when I get into arguments with people about the editing issue, I always say, I look at Maharaj's life and I see how he's living, he's following the principles, he's living as a sannyasi, he's not, you know, and that instills trust in me. And I'm not saying this to be a flatterer, I'm just saying it's a principle there. And if you can't trust somebody who is doing, you know, following the process as Prabhupada gave it, then you can't trust somebody just because they have a sentiment that things should be one way or the other. You have to look at the person who's doing it. And I don't know if that's the right way to think or the wrong way to think, but it seems to me to be a worthwhile principle that people, when they're trying to get something accomplished in Krishna consciousness, the faith that if they're following Prabhupada and they're following the process, that they should just proceed and do what needs to be done and have faith that things will turn out right, as long as they're adhering to the process properly and doing the best that they can. Of course, skill enters into it, and you know, native intelligence and all of that. But that faith in following, it seems to me to be essential to getting something accomplished. Would you have anything to expand on or say about that?
Yeah, you've touched on quite a number of topics. First, it's remarkable that the way Prabhupada engaged people. You know, like Lord Ram conquering Lanka with a band of monkey soldiers, monkeys and bears and what have you. Srila Prabhupada engaged whoever Krishna sent him. So he, an example is Bombay, where he wanted a temple built. So this devotee Surabhi had some abilities in drawing, and Prabhupada asked him to design a temple, and made him quite an architect of a major landmark building in Bombay, and a landmark building in Vrindavan, and a landmark building in Mayapur, and more. And he became quite a creditable and even influential architect, from a person who had no background, you know, in architecture. And similarly, Prabhupada took all sorts of people who had no real background in what they were doing and made them into something by his training, or by his desire, with help from Krishna. You do this, and somehow or other, sometimes it would get done, sometimes it wouldn't get done, sometimes it would fizzle. You know, the person wouldn't be able to do it, and sometimes he would. But Prabhupada would sort of go at it and engage whoever Krishna sent. I think of the printing press, where, you know, if you were a businessman and you wanted to set up a press, you'd probably buy an existing business, or you'd go out and hire people with a background. Prabhupada just engaged. Some disciples knew that Prabhupada wanted to print books. They went and got involved in the printing industry. Then they set up something. when we first published Nectar of Devotion, which was pretty much the first one of the first items, first books to come off our press, we sent copies to Prabhupada, and the binding fell apart. The book, the pages fell out in Prabhupada's hands. So this was, there were shortcomings, and more where those came from. But gradually, the devotees became more accomplished and expert in doing what they were doing, whether it was editing or proof typing or proofreading or printing or distributing books. From the beginning, no one knew how to distribute a book, and then the Prabhupada said, somehow I want these books distributed, and BBT became a huge distributor of books. Devotees, just by their determination and by Krishna's mercy, learned how to do it. And so many other things that devotees, starting temples. He'd drop somebody off somewhere and say, start a temple. He'd order some new disciple, start a temple. And the person had never started anything in his life, and Prabhupada saying, start a temple. And they would have to, and that means you have to do the accounting, you have to do the everything that's involved in running a business, as it were, and managing people, human resources, somehow or other. And yes, Prabhupada would have faith in people, or not, but but you're the best we've got, so go out there and do it. And he would entrust the work to someone. And they might succeed or not succeed, but if they sincerely made the attempt, something would happen more often than not, or not. And Krishna Prabhupada would try again some other way. He would try again some other way. But he sent those householder couples to London, and it had a huge impact, where trained Gaudiya Vaishnav sannyasis had not been able to accomplish anything. Prabhupada's monkey army, or his new disciples, were able to accomplish extraordinary things, absolutely extraordinary. And on what? On their faith in Prabhupada, in their dedication to Prabhupada, their enthusiasm, their conviction that that Krishna consciousness was true, was right, was the thing to do. So we can learn from that. There's a question from Sankarshan.
Thank you.
Of all complaints you've heard about the editing, are there any that have made an impression on you that seem worth considering? Yes, there are certainly issues worth considering. The main one, I would say, is devotees who have a concern that in the future editing could go on and on and on with people who had never met Prabhupada, who might have only a third hand or fourth hand or 10th hand understanding of what Prabhupada had said, and that the works of Srila Prabhupada could get bent out of shape, that people could edit things irresponsibly or with less understanding or less restraint, and the things could go out of hand. I think that's a legitimate concern. It's not stupid. It's not undeserving, unworthy. It's a very legitimate concern that many devotees have expressed, and BBT trustees have in mind also. That sometimes it's expressed, where does it end? To what extent can you go? And would it be what Prabhupada wanted? Or at some point, are you just going beyond what you're legitimately meant to do? So I think that's a sober and intelligent concern. I think that's a sober and intelligent concern. And many are sober and intelligent. You know, are you? Yeah, I think that's the main one that comes to my mind. And of course, there's two responses to that. One is you can say, well, we seal the books, and from now on, you know, from this date on, or from the date when the last editors who had personal contact with Srila Prabhupada leave the world or can no longer do it, we seal the books and no one else can touch them. That's one way to respond to it. There are other ways to respond. You can establish an editorial board, which it seems the BBT has now done, or there are various other ways to approach it. If you seal them, the problem is then you find errors that really need fixing, and then you say, yeah, but we just sealed them, so we can't fix them. And we've had that discussion at the BBT many times. We say, well, you know, shouldn't we seal them? And then again, we keep turning up things that were wrongly done. I remember, maybe it was like within the last 2 years, I gave a class on third canto, and it said, "My dear King Vidura," and went on from there. And I thought, wait a second, Vidura wasn't a king. And I looked back at the manuscript, which I had a copy of, and sure enough, it was "My dear king, Vidura," and went on talking about Vidura. But the devotees who edited it, which probably would have been me at the time, didn't know whether Vidura was a king or not. And so, "My dear King Vidura, after such and such." And so it's clearly wrong. It's clearly an error, and it wasn't Prabhupada's error. It was probably my error. And should we have said, well, I'm sorry, the books were sealed 3 years ago, and you can't go back and fix that, and so we have to have King Vidura forever? Or do we allow a revision? And then what revisions do you allow? Are there restrictions on what can be revised and what can't be revised? So these are all things that the BBT will have to deal with. As I mentioned, I'm not involved in that anymore, but these are the sort of questions that the trustees will have to decide upon. Let's just see. For some reason, my type is very small in the chat box today. Oh, yeah. Some things, this is what I can am I interested in writing an autobiography? I feel your personal story is very valuable. No, I wouldn't be very interested in writing an autobiography. To give a short answer. Considering that people won't even be speaking contemporary languages in 100 to 200 years from now, the issue is never going to be resolved once and for all. How many people are still reading the King James Bible and understanding it? Yeah, there's that question when English is no longer like Chaucerian English. you sort of need a special education to understand, even though Shastra was writing in just sort of normal English for the time. So yes, we will have that problem. Words change and mean different things. In my lifetime, I've seen gay go from meaning happy to meaning something very different. Just to give one small example. Maharaj Suman says, some things like pravritim, acting properly, cha also, nivritim, not acting improperly. Bhagavad Gita 16:7, latest edition, is an obvious mistake. Who decides to not change it immediately? GBC doesn't. Yes, this is the BBT trustees. They're responsible for this. If you have what seems to be an error that comes to your attention, you can write to Errors in English Books at pamho.net, errors.english.books@pamho.net. It's in your chat box. You can write to, that's the address to write to bring it to the attention of the BBT's editors. And the BBT trustees have, of course, the ultimate say over how things are done. That's the only thing I do these days. If I see something that looks like a mistake, I report it to that address. That's, any citizen can do that. Any mistake that you see, you can just write to that. Or any question you have, is this a mistake or not, you can send to that address. Yeah. Okay. Well, it looks like we have come to the end of our hour. Also, I almost never find anything in your wonderful CC translations. Well, they're not my translations, they're Prabhupada's translations. And it's, in fact, it's not even my editing a lot of the time. I edited Adi Leela and Antya Leela, and Hayagriva Prabhu edited the Madhya Leela. As a production, well, as a part of the production line in Los Angeles at the time, I did go over the Madhya Leela, but really very quickly. That was part of our 17-book marathon. So I did look over Hayagriva's work, but zip, 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 not in great, at great length. But Adi Leela and Antya Leela, that's where I was involved doing editorial work. But the translations are Prabhupada, the purports are Prabhupada's. We're just in the business of polishing. Any book about the 17-book marathon? No, there isn't a book about it, but certainly there could be. That would be a neat little piece of work. A good subject. The Hayagriva Prabhu was such a good writer. Yes, he was. He's a very good writer. Okay. I haven't been, cutting things off exactly at 8 because the on Thursdays these days, Tuako isn't doing classes. So I've let us go over a few minutes, but it is time to end. Have all the other classes on New Jersey Sangha been discontinued? Okay. No, what's happened is that Yashoda Dulal Prabhu has been sort of recruiting the speakers for Tuesdays and Thursdays. Well, first, they've decided that Saturdays and Sundays need to be a day off. There's lots and lots and lots of classes going on the weekends. And so they've said, well, we don't need to do Saturday and Sunday. The weekdays are enough. And Yashoda Dulal Prabhu has been recruiting speakers for Tuesdays and Thursdays. but he's recently changed jobs and he's been quite busy. So he hasn't been able to give attention toward that recruitment. So it's sort of sitting with Madan Gopal. And what he intends to do is get to relaunch Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think next month, starting in February. So again, they'll resume the Tuesdays and Thursdays classes. Otherwise, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm speaking, and that's it for now. But Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think we should start seeing the former program of having wonderful speakers. Okay. Otherwise, there's so many classes. It's during these times, there are so many wonderful classes going on, and we can take advantage of them. And I don't think there's a central directory anywhere, but there's, although it might be nice. What classes do you hear regularly? These days, I'm listening to Indradumna Maharaj's classes he's doing on Vrindavan, from Vrindavan. He's been locked down in Vrindavan. So I've been listening to his classes regularly. I've been listening to the Govardhan retreats organized by Burijan Prabhu and Sachinandan Maharaj. I wish I were listening to Niranjan Maharaj's classes and Bibi Govinda Maharaj's classes. It's just too much. I can't keep up. And there's so many other classes going on that we have embarrassed de riche. We have so much wealth that we can't keep up with it all. So there you are. Wonderful, wonderful classes being given by so many wonderful devotees. You know, Kadambakanan Maharaj is giving regular classes, and many, I think everybody practically, well, so many preachers, so many leading devotees are giving classes. And if it's that you'd like to bring to the attention of this, the devotees here on the Istagosthi, then feel free. It's like that's a topic. Istagosthi means chosen topics, topics that were of interest. So if you'd like to contribute something like that, let us know what you found. Share with us what you found on the internet of classes by devotees that others here might be interested in. By all means, feel free to share that. All right, we've gone to 8:10, and I think
Maharaj,
yes.
Hare Krishna. Maharaj, a quick
Hare
question.
They're all quick. Go ahead.
So, where are the bona fide Bengali translations of the books that Prabhupada hasn't translated? The Sanskrit one, I know Gopi Purandan Prabhu, Bhanuswami Maharaj have done most of the things. But for ISKCON point of view, the Bengali books, is there anyone who has actually translated them?
Into English, you mean?
Yes.
Is there anyone who's translated Bengali books into English?
I mean, I find so many editions, but I don't know which is bona fide or such.
Well, I don't know either. There, of course, neither the BBT nor ISKCON has any sort of body that recommends or recommends for or against books generally, certifies or certifies against books that the devotees publish them, and it's up to you to decide what you think. Trying to think of who and who's out there.
Sarvabhauma or Sarvabhauma is saying he translates a lot.
Sarvabhavana Prabhu, perhaps.
No,
He's
it's not
our
the,
Bengali.
not the best English, but it's still, like you said, the message is.
Yeah, I'm really not quite sure what's out there. There's a lot of stuff out there, and I'm not quite sure about its.
Because
What's
some of the books that I see on ISKCON Desire Tree, they are
Yes.
Bon Maharaj's books.
Acha.
Yeah, so I don't know. But
He
Sanskrit,
didn't.
I know I can go to Bhanuswami Maharaj.
Yeah. Swami Ban Maharaj, I don't think published very much, mostly his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, of which I think only one volume was published. There's not a lot out there from him. Srila Prabhupada wasn't enthusiastic about his work. And then there's other things from Gaudiya Math, which generally devotees haven't given much attention to because it really, the English has just not been.
I mean, there are some
barely
books
intelligible.
by Sridhar Maharaj, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj.
Oh
Are
yes.
they good? I find
Well,
a lot
again,
of translations.
Srila Sridhar Maharaj hasn't, as far as I know, translated particular works. He hasn't like translated this book or that book, but there have been compilations from his teachings, which in general I find very good. Again, I don't know that I want to sit here and say, well, this one's good, that one's good, that one's not good, this one's sort of good. Yeah, so and a lot of these books I haven't read also, so I can't really say. There's a book called Follow the Angels, compiled from Srila Sridhar Maharaj's teachings, which I found very good. And then there's writings by our godbrothers. There's so many books now. There's so many books now. But anyway, that becomes another topic. That becomes another topic. Oh, as far as sharing how.
Because you said we can share classes that we're hearing that are inspiring.
Yeah, you can just bring them here and tell us about them.
Oh,
Put them in the chat box and
okay.
so on. Not today because we're going to close up,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
My goodness, how is this type kind so small today? Very important books like Jayadvaita. Again, there are books out there that I think are quite good. Some of them may be done by people that ISKCON has some issue with, but they're good books nonetheless. Some of them come with anyway, I think there are books out there that make substantial contributions. One is best guided by one's seniors and one's spiritual master about what to read, what not to read. I don't think I want to get deeper into that, but there are books out there that make a substantial contribution. And we will end, right? We don't want to go too much beyond our hour, because then it starts to be that you don't know when you sign on how long we're going to be and when we're going to be. Yeah, when you sign on, you should have some idea when you're going to be able to sign off. It helps to know, to stick to to your standards and your expectations. I don't want to run on and on. And so, good evening. Thank you all very much. Happy chanting. All glory to Srila Prabhupada.
Jai, Hari.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
How you doing?